Hey everyone, Dan here. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button and keep in mind that these are my own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. These are not meant to be, nor should you take them as investment or trading advice in any way, shape, or form. Do your own due diligence, put in the work for yourself, and make your decisions based on that. Enjoy. All right, folks, here we are after market close on Monday, October 2nd. We're going to take a look at NVTA today. So NVTA up quite a bit today, a little over 13% by close. If we take a look at the intraday today, on the 10-minute chart here, we have a really strong motion up through the pre-market today, and then a bit of a selling off, but interestingly, a nice condensing period where it is building a base here right over about 66. So I thought what we would do is come in, take a look at the daily first, put in some levels that might come into play, support and resistance, any trend lines, and obviously there's a gap. Take a look at the gap, put that on the chart, and then we'll zoom in, see how those levels acted intraday, and then take a look at some other indicators, including the TTM squeeze indicator down here. So first things first, let's go in and plot ourselves a bit of a course here. So we have obviously this gap that we want to note 6650. So let's pin that to the bottom as best we can. If Webull will let me. Yep. So we're going to gray this out just so that it's not terribly prominent on the chart. And if it starts to come into play, it starts to come into play. And on a high here, 63.29. That's what we're going to want. Pin that to the top. 63.29. There we go. And we'll gray that out as well. All right, so those are our levels. This level here is pretty close into also a support level, so I'm going to turn this guy purple. And that's just to say, hey, that is a gap entry point, but that's also a support level. If we didn't have the gap in there, we would still put that level in as a near-in support level. So let's see what else we can grab on here. Let me just zoom out for a second, see if we have any previous price activity. No, we don't have anything in this range. No, not unless we go way, way far back, or maybe not at all. So let's just stick with what we have here. Now we have pretty good level here at 80.89. Just call it 81. That's a pretty good level. We have another level here, 84.15. We'll grab another couple sort of to the upside in case it pushes. But otherwise, definitely want to put some tight in to where the price action ended up today, so that if it sort of, bats the price action around in between, that we have some levels to go off of. So let's take a look intraday today and see, obviously strong level here just above. Okay, so that sort of makes sense now. We were talking earlier how intraday the price rose strong into pre-market, sold off a little bit, made another push into open, but then sold off and just sort of strangely built this floor after such a big push. But now we can see that is the entry point. So if this were to dip below the 66.50 level, it would then be entering the gap that it left when it ran up in the overnight hours. So that gap only goes down to 63.29, but percentage wise, we see here 8 cents is a 13% move. So it's about a 3-cent gap down. So we'll see if that sort of starts to come into play or not, and what that means. But in the meantime, obviously that purple level is a very strong force. Now we're not going to have a ton to go off of. We're going to have today's price action plus some of the price action that was accumulated after hours on Friday, and then as things sort of kicked off today. So that's what I'm going to, try to draw these levels from. But just keep in mind that aside from these levels above 80 and the purple level and the gray level down here, these are all just intraday levels. So they might not last as long as those levels that we put it on the daily chart. Let's see if we have something else here. We have one kind of ish, maybe. It's so close also, 79.53 up to 80.89. For the time being, I'm going to leave it off and just say we don't want to clutter the chart too much. This is already getting a little bit full, but it did run through quite a big percentage change up and down today. So it just covered a lot of ground. So it's just sort of the case. Now in the gap here, maybe something around here. We'll put this in for now. But if it continues to put in levels in the gap or through this range, the more price action we get in here, the less we'll have to rely on one day's intraday activity, including like the pre-market and the after hours from the last trading session. And that should help get, better levels situated in there. So this is sort of how things looked throughout the day. So if you had these levels on the chart, so just thinking about, maybe tomorrow, if the price action is sort of moving in the pre-market and into open, we would have seen it pushing off of this 90-ish level up here, running through a bunch of levels, coming all the way down, building a little bit of a base, and then just sort of wavy gravy here a little bit, but making some higher lows you see here into open, right? So it's certainly making a few higher lows, some higher highs here, some higher highs here. But then what happened is basically 3 candles straight. Well, I guess if you include these, 5 candles straight, it just got stuck at that 84.15. And it's that thing that I always talk about, which is you go to the well too many times. In other words, you try to get bulls to push through this level of 84.15 too many times, and they just sort of run out of steam, and the buying pressure isn't there anymore. And so sort of a bit of brief capitulation leads to a steep sell-off because there's more sellers picking up through these levels than buyers, and then buyers trying to sort of make a little stand here, but that didn't last long, and then essentially having to just settle for that 66.50 level and batting itself between there and the 70.20 throughout the rest of the day. So we'll see how this plays out tomorrow. If we're able to get a push over this 70 level, that would be the most critical component to me. If it slips below this 66.50, I'd look to see what it does around that 64 range. And if not, then pretty close to that before we even get to 63 would be a gap fill. What I would maybe watch out for if it does come down and fill this gap tomorrow is what does it do at that moment in time? That's always a critical moment because oftentimes a couple of things can happen. One, the momentum that sort of pushed the price action through that gap continues to carry on strongly. And if that's the case, then it could come down and push a little further down, maybe having to test the bottom of this candle body, for example. So here right around like high 62s. Actually, we could put a level in there just in case that does happen tomorrow. Something right around here. Yeah, that's a nice level there. And then if it slips there, something right around here, that's a little less, it's not a little less, it's much less clean, this one. But there's a few tight end levels there where it may start catching some support. But I would look for that. If it comes down, fills that gap to the downside, that momentum could carry it through, and it could need additional support levels to try to pick it up. The other thing that could happen is it comes through, partially fills or fills the gap, and it uses that opportunity to set up, the tops of these candle bodies as new support. And then that could be the case, and we could see it sort of try to run back through the gap again to the upside and continue on its merry way. And if so, then the levels that we have in the chart would be in play throughout the day tomorrow. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. Pretty critical moment on any gap fill to see if the momentum is just going to carry it through. Now in the TTM squeeze indicator here, we zoom out a bit. Nothing really happening. It still is just kind of firing here. We had this brief trigger period back here for, was this just a candle or two? And then it fired and had a pretty big move down, but then that set off this sort of series of pretty wild moves. And I'm kind of surprised that the indicator here isn't picking up additional triggers and fires. So we'll see sort of what that is. But, this is also on the daily, so just keep that in mind. Bearish momentum was picking up, and then today is the first bearish candle that's showing some sort of potentially dying down of bearish momentum, on this swing at least. So we'll see if that continues into tomorrow or not, and if so, if it can have a nice sort of smooth transition period here and maybe flip to some bullish strength, but that would probably be days away if that were to be the case. Now, if we just zoom in and see where we left off intraday today on the 10-minute, large firing period here, and then started to trigger. So while it was accumulating in the later half of the day over this gap level, it started triggering, and it continued triggering through close. So I'm kind of interested to see if, in the short term at least, that trigger results in a fire that maybe sets off something interesting. Now, let's take a look at our channels here. Now, the reason we're looking at the TTM squeeze indicator and the channels on this chart is because through the transition that Thinkorswim is going through with Schwab buying them, that is no longer working, which is really disappointing. But my setup there has sort of gone kaput. So that's just the case at the moment. And so we have to deal with it on this chart, which I kind of hate because now it's just not as easy to look at because we have all the levels on here as well. So I'm going to see if there's a way to sort that out. But for now, this is what we have. So in the channel here, we see today, it spent a lot of time out of the channel, right? It got caught. This is the mid-range of the channel here. This blue line got caught, fell out of the channel, tested the mid-range, and then just sort of got pinned below the mid-range of the channel and eventually slipped out the lower bound of the channel. This is relatively recently, and has spent a bunch of time outside of the channel. What we always look for when something slips out of the channel to the upside or the downside is for it to revert back to the mid-range of the channel. And so that's what we see here. Today, it came and is testing the mid-range of the channel. And so that's where it's sort of, pushing off of today. So I'm interested to see, right now it's finished the day below the mid-range of the channel. So I'm interested to see if that persists, meaning that it came up and hit resistance and now it's sort of falling back again, or if it's able to try to get support over the mid-range of that channel. It's going to need that if it's going to be able to continue to push in any meaningful way. Now, the other thing I would look at here, since we don't have the Thinkorswim at the moment, would be the EMAs up here. So we have, this is the 180 to 200, what would typically be a cloud on my Thinkorswim setup. So if we sort of get rid of those guys for the moment, we can take a look. Hold on a sec. Let's get rid of those guys because they're throwing off our mojo here. Oh, not the MA, the EMA. Okay. All right. And then here we can see it's stretched the entirety of the EMA stay, which is really interesting. So it's trying to get support over the 8 EMA, which would be key to it continuing to carry. So again, if it slips into this gap tomorrow, not only would it be losing the gap support above 66.50, but it would potentially be losing the 8 EMA support and any potential, at least for the near future, for it to have a nice big bullish push through and get a bullish crossover, the 8 crossing over the 21, and then the 8 crossing over the 34, and then the 21 crossing over the 34. That's a big sort of bullish cascade, if you will. But this is really interesting. It just stretched the entirety of this today, which is not super common to see. So critical day tomorrow and Wednesday to see what it's going to do with this. If it's going to be able to continue to build over that 8 EMA, or if it's going to push strongly off of this 34 and off of this 21 and sort of get pushed back below and then even into that gap, obviously. All right, folks, we'll see what tomorrow brings, but I hope that your trading day got off to a good start today. And as always, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next video.